The film The Invisible Man was made in 2020 and it stars Elisabeth Moss, a name I struggle with for some reason, but she was in Mad Men. I didn't know a lot about this film, I just heard it was a little bit different and that caught my attention, so I thought I'd better try and check this out and see what it's all about. It's been called a science fiction horror, but it's probably a little bit more than that when you actually get down to it. The first half of it is definitely a horror, but in the psychological way, and then the second half is more science fiction action maybe. So the film starts out and the sea's crashing against the rocks and the film pans up to a light there on the cliff. We see a couple in bed and Cecilia is trying to get out of it without waking her partner Adrian. And this adds to the mystery because we're trying to work out what's going on here. Is she trying to escape a one-night stand? But it becomes clear that she's quite fearful of her partner. It's a really nice house and he's got this workshop where he's working on loads of different projects and she has to turn off the security. And she nearly gets out without waking him up, but then she sets off a car alarm and then the chase begins. She escapes and then she hears that he's committed suicide, which doesn't sound like him at all. He leaves her £5 million because he's a specialist in the field of optics. So this is really where the story starts. And then strange and wonderful things start to happen around the house. Things go missing. And then that escalates into her being isolated as one by one her friends are pushed away from her. So what I really liked about this movie was it was kind of two movies in one. The first half was the horror. It was a mystery, you're trying to work out what's going on. And it's that psychological element where you're not quite sure whether something is happening or it isn't, if it's in the mind of Cecilia. And then once us, the audience, know exactly what's going on, that there is something happening and it's not just in her mind. And of course, she doesn't seem to be in her right mind as she tries to explain everything to the people around her. And so in this half of the film, I liked that the things that were happening around her weren't too obvious. There were a lot of subtle things and some less subtle things, but they're all done really well. And I think that added to the horror aspect. And then there's a revelation, and that changes the movie into a more of a science fiction thriller. We as an audience know exactly what's going on, so it's this action-packed journey to the resolution. The two halves of the film can also be evidenced in their pacing. So the first half is a lot slower as we try and find things out, and the second half is a lot more faster paced because of all the action. I think my favourite bit was the middle of this, or the second act as it were, when Cecilia's trying to explain to everybody around her exactly what's happening. We as an audience know exactly what's happening, but of course everything that she says just makes people less likely to believe her. And I always judge the bad bits in the film is either when I start to look around me or it actually takes me out of the film altogether. And there was only one moment really when that happened, and that's when she's in the hospital and a gun is floating around the corridor. It just doesn't look right. All the other Invisible Man effects were done quite well, but that one just looks like it's floating on a string, I'm afraid. So I'd recommend you to watch this film. It's not going to change your life, but it's good for a Saturday night when there's nothing else on, and I would probably mark it around 7 out of 10.